During the early 2000s, when I was attending law school, I worked nights delivering pizza for one of the national chains. I had done something similar when I was younger and attending my local community college. Anytime I found myself sorely in need of quick cash, that was the avenue I would choose. Despite the many stories I have heard questioning the safety of the job, I never had a single run-in with a thief. I'm sure back in the early days, it could be a little dangerous, but by the time I joined the game, companies had learned that implementing practices such as limiting the driver to $20 lowered the chance of holdups drastically. Even though I was never a victim of a robbery, I did have one or two scary incidents I could write about. The worst of these happened to me back in the 2000s. I was very familiar with the city I was living at the time. Moving there after junior college and delivering for several places over the last 5 years had made me intimate with almost every nook and cranny of the place. However, one evening I would be called to an address that I, nor any of the other drivers even knew existed. When the order came in, I went straight to the map to find the address, but it wasn't there. Not even the GPS on my phone showed it. We didn't have any no delivery areas at that time, so I had to take it despite my misgivings. Theoretically, the place would have existed if the road continued for 10 more blocks, so I turned on to said road a block before its ending and followed it south. Sure enough, a newly paved road began where the old one should have ended. For what seemed like miles, I continued on this new section of road. Nothing stood on the other side of it, and I didn't pass another car the whole time. How the state managed to build it without a single report of its creation leaking to the media had me bewildered. The 5 years I'd been driving all over the city, I'd not known this part existed. In one way, I was very excited seeing all of it, like a Victorian explorer tracing the sources of the Nile. But at the same time, a deserted road popping up out of nowhere gave me a chill down my spine. It must have been a good 10 minutes before the house in question appeared in the distance. I couldn't understand why someone would build a house out here in the middle of nowhere with no way to reach it. When I got closer, I could see the house had to be at least 50 years old or more, and probably hadn't been repaired since then. No cars were around, and for a moment, I thought the house was abandoned, but I could see the front door wide open behind the rickety old screen. Everything looked to be above board, so I grabbed the pizza and headed for the door. I knocked on the screen door, but got no answer. I could see what appeared to be a young female walking around the kitchen. When I knocked a second time, I heard a female voice say to come in. Despite my reservations, I stepped just inside the house and waited in the small foyer. I had learned from other drivers early on not to enter an unfamiliar house, but I had yet to see anything to concern me. I assumed the woman would be coming out soon to pay me. Instead, I overheard an unseen man whisper, "Call him into the kitchen." When I heard that, I fled from that place as fast as I could. I was so freaked out I got back to the restaurant in half the time it took me to get to the house. After I told my boss what had just occurred, he called the police. All the excitement had me rattled, so my boss sent me home for the day. My phone rang a few hours later. It was the police. They'd called to let me know what they had found. Whoever had been there was gone now. Even though the place had more than likely been abandoned for a while, they did find evidence that people had just recently been inside. This was stuff my boss had already told them. However, they did shed light on where the road came from and why the house was the only building on an otherwise deserted area. The state had been trying to purchase the land on which the new section of road and house were for 20 years, but the landowner wouldn't sell. They even tried to use eminent domain to get it, but a judge blocked it. Around 2 years before, the owner passed, and his children finally sold the land to the state. They were so happy to get the land after all that time, the construction on the road was started immediately. It technically had yet to be formally open, but locals had already began using it anyway. This was good to know, but I still wondered how the two people knew about the empty house sitting out in the middle of nowhere. This was something the officer didn't know. We could only assume they drove past it and decided it would be as good a place as any to ambush a delivery driver. Even $20 is a good score if you're desperate enough. He said from personal experience, people have killed for much less. The officer left me with one good piece of news, though. The county had slated the old house to be demolished in the coming week, so no other poor delivery driver would be let out there to be robbed or worse. 2 days later, I was driving down the brand new road, which I was now using as a shortcut across town, and witnessed the house's destruction. A load was even being lifted from my shoulders right before my eyes. Never again would I enter a customer's home or even deliver to an area in which I was not well versed. Perhaps in the future I'll share my other story. While not as harrowing, it was still scary nonetheless.
I used to work in a Pizza Hut when I was in high school. I have a bunch of weird stories from working there, but this one, it scared me the most. My Pizza Hut was the kind where you can only pick up the food, and there was a wall between the storefront and the kitchen of the store. So if you were in the front, you were pretty much on your own. The store itself is located at an out-of-way dead shopping center. And this was Atlantic City. This should tell you a lot about our clients. For some reason, I always got stuck on the late shift despite being in high school. So, for most weekdays, it would be just me and one other cook in the store, past 10 p.m., twiddling our thumbs. I would hang out at the front, and the cook would wait in the kitchen, out of earshot. One night, I was hanging behind the counter, and I see a guy walk past. Didn't think much of it, and went back to doing nothing, waiting for my shift to end. Then the door of the shop opens, and it's the same guy that walked by. He is tall, but is thin like a skeleton, and there was something not right about his eyes. But despite him putting me on edge, I get up, greet him, and ask him what he would like to order. Nothing. He just stands in front of me, staring at the ceiling, muttering to himself. I was only 17, and for the most part a good kid despite living in Atlantic City, so I didn't know what to make of it. Now, I would probably chalk it up to drugs. Anyways, he is standing there making up impressions and muttering in what looks like tongues. Then he abruptly spins around and walks out of the store without even acknowledging that I exist. At this point, I am unnerved, but I shake it off and sit down. My shift was about to end, and I was counting down the minutes when I realized that somebody had walked in. I look up, and it's the same guy with the same creepy eyes, only this time he is holding a phone to his ear and muttering intelligibly. I realize that he is not talking to anyone, and he was staring at me super intensely. At this point, I am getting frightened. He just keeps looking at me, and so I ask if I can help him. He starts walking towards the counter, still looking at me. Then he suddenly asked in a perfectly normal voice if his order was ready. And I was going, what the fuck? At this time, and I'm not sure how to answer, so I go with the truth and told him honestly that he did not order anything when he was in the first time. He gets this bugged-eye look and lunges at the counter, and I jump back. My heart was pounding at this point. This guy is not sane, and he is going to pull out a knife and stab me. Then just as absurdly, he lunged. He yelled, "God damn it!" and looked as if he was going to cry. He puts his head in his hands and starts pulling at his hair. I started feeling bad for this guy and asked politely and nicely if he maybe wants to order something now, and his head just snaps back up and his expression is completely blank. He looks deranged. I am holding still because I am afraid that moving will set him off. Then, thankfully, the door to the store opens and a huge man walks in. He looks at the guy, kind of confused, and realizes that something was not right with him. The crazy guy looks at him, and looks at me, and starts backing up until he's out of the door. He starts walking to the edge of the storefront, looking at me the whole time, and then goes past the edge of the door, and now he's gone. The other guy looked at me and asked, "What the hell was that?" And I just said that I had no idea at all and thought the guy was crazy. I tried to shake it off, but I was totally on edge for the rest of my shift. When I clocked out that night, I made one of the drivers walk out with me. Then I jumped into my car and got the hell out of there. I never saw that dude again, but it was a really strange and unnerving experience. I don't know what he would have done if that guy had not walked in when he did.